Children, the 10th of April, 2025. Jesus said about God, God says, "When 2 or 3 people are gathered in my name, I am among them." Was Jesus speaking about God or about himself? Either way, it has to be true. How so? If Jesus was speaking about God, then it is true. God is with those who mention him. And if people were speaking about God, mentioning God's name, God would be there with them. So you are leaning more towards Jesus saying that about God and not himself. If Jesus was saying that about himself, being among those who mention him or speak about him, then it is also true. Jesus will be sent as a witness with and against the people. If people speak falsehood about Jesus, whether it were 2 or 3 people or more, then Jesus will be there among them to bear witness against what they are saying on the day of judgment. The younger man shakes his head in disbelief. Then he mutters to himself, "You keep twisting the words." The older man replied, "I'm not twisting the words. It is true about all the prophets of God. They will all be brought in front of God on account of what people propagate about them. If people started propagating falsehood about a certain prophet, God would have already sent that prophet to bear witness on what people are saying about him. If not, God would send an angel to bear witness in the prophet's place." The younger man says, "Are you saying that people who die still listen to those who are alive?" The older man says, "I'm not sure. God does whatever he wishes, but he would certainly not allow his prophets to be called deceivers or liars. If they die and people start telling lies about them, it's God's rightful right to hold people accountable for the lies they made about the prophets. Hence, God would send the prophet back to bear witness against the people who speak about them and attempt to harm the prophet's word, name, or honesty." The older man drinks from his cup and then looks down into it with contempt, saying, "Who is to say that all the prophets would be listening to you now? Who is to say that God would let them listen to you and bear witness to what you are doing and what you are saying about them?" A third man joins the discussion, saying, "It would be God's right. He makes whoever he wishes to hear whatever he decides should be heard." The young man replies, "What if I did not want anything to be heard?" The third man replied, "Then hold your tongue and do not speak falsehoods about them." The young man says, "Then that would make the whole subject of any of the prophets considered taboo. People should be wary not to speak their names in fear that they might hear or witness what is being said." The older man replied, "They are called messengers, warners, witnesses. Their judgment on the day of judgment would include what people of the latter generations said about them. It would not be exclusive to their own actions." He then raises his hand and smacks the young man on the left cheek and says, "If on the day of judgment God asks me why I did that and I reply, 'Because Jesus said so,' then Jesus would be brought and would testify that it wasn't done because he said so, but because it was a vain example. Jesus is truthful, and for him to remain truthful, he has to be given the ability to bear witness against those who testify falsely about him." The third man replied, "If 2 or 3 people or more." Then he shook his head and said, "An eye for an eye." The older man then said to the younger, "You can definitely smack me back since you are a Jew." The younger man said, "What does it matter that I'm a Jew? It is one of God's laws, an eye for an eye." The older man said, "Truly, it is one of God's laws. But God also said that those who forgive would be rewarded. So justice is not taken by applying God's laws blindly, but by taking in the results and outcomes as well." The younger man said, "If you are forgiven, what kind of reward would be given?" The older man said, "It is God who decides the rewards. It might be in this life, or it might be in the hereafter. Hence, only believers would forgive others' transgression against them." The third man responded, "What of the grudge that formulates because of the act itself? Some people would request closure and justice to be provided immediately." The older man said, "Those who are blinded by the grudge would not be considered among those who forgive. There are certain belief-driven actions that only believers would do, and forgiveness is one of them. Nevertheless, forgiveness can come from all different kinds of people. Some people would even forgive a killer." The younger man said, "Again, what kind of reward would be given to those who forgive a killer? Doesn't God say to punish with the sword those who kill with the sword?" The older man replied, "If people are searching for a reward in this life, they would get a temporary one by killing a killer. What if the killer did it unintentionally? What if the dead person wronged the killer, stole his money, raped his wife, did all kinds of wrong because he was killed? You do not bring justice to a dead person by killing his killer." The 11th of April, 2025. I call out to the three men arguing in front of me, "Shush, stop talking, it just started." The voice of the respondent comes from the TV set, and he says, as though he is answering a question that was not presented by the interviewer. He says, "Children." The interviewer explains, "We just started broadcasting. I apologize for asking the question preemptively." The respondent replies, "My answer still stands. They think they are children of God, yet their own definition of that term makes it problematic for them and for later generations." The interviewer says, "We are speaking about Christians, right?" He replied, "Yes, Christians consider themselves children of God." The interviewer replies, "Why is that wrong?" He replies, "Because God has no children." The interviewer says, "But God states in the Bible, 'Israel is my firstborn son.' And when he spoke to David, he said that he, that is God, would be a father to his son, Solomon." The respondent answered, "It doesn't mean a literal son. God could still punish them in hellfire, whether it is Israel, Solomon, or anyone else who calls himself a child of God." He then leaned forward and spoke reassuringly, "God's punishments and his fire are eternal punishments. If they were really his children, God would not throw them in hell for transgression. God has no children." The interviewer answered, "Are you saying that?" The respondent interrupts, "I'm saying what you heard me say. God has no children. When the term is used, a son or a daughter, in the Bible, it is used metaphorically, because the Greeks and the Romans and those who even spoke Aramaic and Hebrew had no term equivalent to the term consecrated for God." The interviewer responded, "I do not understand." The respondent replied, "When Christians say that about themselves, what do they mean?" The interviewer replied, "I do not know what they mean. I'm not a Christian." The respondent said, "I do not know what they mean either, but since they called any creation of God to be children of God, does that mean when Christians say it, they are just saying we are creatures of God or we are servants of God? The interviewer replied, could be either of them, creatures or servants. The respondent said, then why not use that term instead of blaspheming against God by saying that he would have children? Adam was not a son of God, but he was a creature whom God created. Similarly, Jesus was no different than Adam. Adam was created without a father or a mother, and Jesus was created without a father. The interviewer replied, hasn't Jesus called God the Father? The respondent answered, it is what Jews called God. They called him the term Avinu, which translates into our Father, in order to reflect the fatherly love he would have for them. But he is not their father, nor were they his children. He laid back on the chair and signed harshly, saying, the Jews do not dare transgress against God, even though they call him that name. However, Christians continue to blaspheme God by claiming he has a son. Know that they are his children. He looked to the right side, away from the interviewer, and exclaimed, they called the angels daughters of God, although angels are all created as males. So yes, children. The interviewer said, what do you mean, children? The respondent said, I mean they are playing a game, like disobedient children, thinking that they will be able to escape the punishment by appealing to God's love, thinking that by saying they are his children, that he will not punish them for their sins. Therefore, they would be doing whatever they desire during their lives. Then he scoffed and said, it is no wonder they developed this belief about Jesus, that he had died for their sins. That would be too convenient for someone who would be willing to sin over and over and pin it on Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. The interviewer replied, I thought you did not believe Jesus died on the cross. He replied, I do not. Jesus did not die on the cross. He ascended to heaven without dying, and he will come back at the end of time for his second coming. Even Christians believe that. The interviewer said, this means he did not die for anyone's sins. He replied, it means he did not die, let alone die for anyone's sins. The young man speaks out, the whole scene of Jesus' death is a metaphor anyway. His death marks the end of the murder of prophets by the Jews. The old man smacks him again on the back of the head and says, did you not understand? He did not die. He ascended to heaven. After a slight pause, the respondent told the interviewer, Enoch ascended to heaven without dying. Elijah ascended to heaven in a whirlwind without dying. Why should Jesus have to die to ascend to heaven in the same manner? Instead, he did not die, but those around him, his disciples and companions, thought that he did. The interviewer said, they believe that he was raised from the dead. The resurrection is an essential tenet of the Christian faith. The respondent stated, resurrection is an essential tenet of all faith. We will all be resurrected from the dead after we die. Our bones, which will turn to dust, will be reformed. Our flesh, which will have been eaten by worms, will be recreated anew. Christian faith is built upon these beliefs as well. You do have to believe in the resurrection after death, but not Jesus' resurrection only, all of humanity's. Jesus has not died yet, but he will after his second coming. He moved himself forward, put his elbows on his feet, and clasped his hands together and said, To believe that Jesus was raised from the dead means that he died. Dying means that the soul is separated from the body, and upon death the soul will ascend to heaven, but not the body. In order to ascend body and soul into heaven, you have to be alive. Therefore, since Jesus ascended to heaven, he did it while he was alive, and not after he died. The interviewer replied, "But they saw him die on the cross." The respondent said, "You keep presenting what everyone else believes or thinks had happened. If he died, most Christian denominations would be following a false claim about Jesus, which has not been resolved for centuries. If he did not die and was raised to heaven in body and soul, then that would be on a more reasonable footing than believing he died and rose from the dead." This discussion, he added, only gives people a chance at becoming extremists when it comes to their beliefs. They believe the Bible says something about it and it is not to be contested. But when those who do believe the Bible start trying to explain it to them, they call them heretics. The respondent continued, "What if the truth is in the Bible, but it is spoken allegorically? It would be difficult for those who take the Bible literally to understand what it means. It is no wonder that Jesus' disciples did not understand him, even though they were closer to him and his life than any of you. You would not be defending your religion if you defend the falsehood injected between its lines. You are not to blame for the falsehood if you do not believe it, and you are not responsible to defend the falsehood if you know it to be false. If it goes against reason, then it is falsehood. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "By whom am I swearing?" "By God." "Then yes, I swear."